Hi, you're listening to the Taking Ground podcast, connecting you to the many excellent churches, ministries and people within our wider family. You can keep up to date with the latest from Taking Ground at takingground.org.uk and never miss an episode of this podcast by hitting subscribe. But for now, here's your host, Rachel Broughton.
Well, today I'm here with Beth Mumby. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you, Beth, because we've been friends for lots of years, which is really nice. I always love chatting to people who I know. It's nice to talk to people I don't know because I don't know their stories, so I'm like digging a little bit. But knowing yours and knowing a bit about your family and a bit about what you do, it's just I'm really looking forward to bringing that to Taking Ground as a network. And I think your story is great, and I think what you do is important. So I'm really looking forward to chatting to you.
Well, it's quite exciting to speak to you, Rachel, and I think it's been good to listen to the podcast and hear people's stories. So yeah, I'm excited to speak to you today.
Oh, good. The feelings are mutual. It's always a good place to start.
In this freezing cold room.
Sorry, I have actually put the heating on, but it's not got anywhere, has it? It's not touching the sides. Oh dear. Well, do you want to just tell me a little bit about you, your family, your background? Give us a little bit of context for who you are, where you are within Taking Ground and all of that kind of stuff.
So I live in Middlesbrough. I go to I go to Middlesbrough Community Church. And I grew up in that church, actually. That's always been my home church. Cool. I grew up in a Christian home. I am the oldest of 7 children.
Just a few
I
siblings.
know. That's crazy, isn't it?
It sounds crazy. Was it crazy?
Yeah,
or was it totally normal for you?
No, well, I mean, it was normal for me, but it was crazy. Lots of fun, lots of chaos, and we didn't have a TV. God bless us. So, you know.
Well, obviously you didn't have a TV.
That was always the joke, wasn't it? People would say to me, "Do your parents not have a TV?" I'm like, no.
They actually don't.
So I've always known God, and when I was about 6, I had my first spiritual experience looking at a nativity set.
Oh, wow.
God just revealed to me that he came as a baby through looking at that set.
That's amazing.
I know,
was it in your home?
Yeah, it was just, my parents still have that nativity set now. And I just remember looking at it and I started crying. So I think you can't underestimate. I mean, I know in our church tradition we don't really have things that are physical in the same way, but
sacred objects or things like that as much.
Yeah, you can't underestimate really about how much God can speak through little things, really.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I was always brought up to hear God's voice. You know, my dad used to say to me on a night, what do you see? Is God giving you a picture? And so I've always grown up with that kind of prophetic way of seeing things, really.
Well, I guess it's just the expectation that God can speak to anybody.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's really cool.
And through anything as well. Because through objects, that was kind of a way I did actually learn to understand, what God's saying. So, someone at a church youth group would bring something out and say, what's God speaking to you out of this bag? And you would have random objects in there. Different things. So it's just learning different ways of hearing God's voice. But that's always been really important to me, really, hearing God's voice. And then I went through a bit of a teenage rebellion when I was in my teenage years.
How cliche, right?
Yes, and then obviously I went to Christian youth camp, and that's where I kind of experienced more of God for myself, and then that started to make a difference in my day-to-day life. It's actually where I met my husband, Johnny, So I was 14 at the time, but we didn't get together till I was 17. And then I went to Bible college on a gap year when I was 18, which was Salt and Light, which was the part of the group of churches we were part of at the time.
That was down in Oxford, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was
I didn't realise you went there.
Yeah, so that was a really formative year for me in terms of just grappling with my own faith and really putting my roots down. And it was a great year. I met so many different people, and it was quite a bit of a contrast, a culture shock, because going down south after living in Middlesbrough for my whole life, very different people and different experience, but that was great. And then, we got married when I was 20, so I was child bride, obviously. 2 days into being 20. And I got married.
Wow.
Obviously didn't have a clue what I was doing. But I was...
But you married Johnny, and
Yeah.
that was a good choice.
Yeah, brilliant choice.
Yeah.
Johnny is a great guy. So
Yeah.
I definitely made a good
Yeah,
choice
you
with
did.
my husband there.
That's great.
So, and then from that point, we got involved in church leadership, that sort of thing.
At Middlesbrough Community Church.
At Middlesbrough Community
Cool.
Church, yes. And we've been serving in different roles there now for years.
Forever,
until
yeah.
now, yeah.
Yeah.
And then when I had my first child, Ina, that she's coming up 9.
Wow.
And then when she was coming up 1, we had a really difficult time as a family. We went through something really hard in our wider family.
Yeah.
And that time was very formative for me spiritually. I was really struggling, but I also really pushed into Jesus. And I had some counselling, which was really good for me, and it was a Christian counsellor. And the lady, she gave me a picture that she had of Jesus standing on the other side of a sea of broken glass. And she said, I feel like the broken glass is the journey you need to go to come to terms with some of the things that have been happening in your life. And she said, but, Jesus is actually walking across the glass to you, and he's going to walk you back across that glass.
Wow.
And he's going to take that pain first. His feet are going to touch that broken glass first. And that picture was so powerful. It's still so powerful to me. And it's such a picture of Jesus and God and how he comes to us and meets us in our pain.
And what his sacrifice has actually done for us.
Exactly, yeah. There's, you can think about the cross, the imagery of Jesus' blood, and then you also think about the fact he became human and gone through the same suffering experience as us, and pain and grief and loss that we feel. So that was a very difficult time for me, but it was a very formative time as well. And I feel like the depth that I got there with God, has carried me forward through my life from that point, really.
It's often through the rear view mirror that we see the journey that we've been on that an easier road wouldn't have taken us on. And it's interesting, isn't it, sort of your theology on that and where you sit, but I do think that God uses everything that we go through to grow us, to shape us, to change us, and ultimately he makes us trophies of his grace to be used for his glory, and I think that's amazing. So tell me a bit about what you're up to now. So you've journeyed that stuff, and Ina was coming up 1. You've kind of journeyed really deeply, and and where's that led you?
Yeah, I think that the depth of my faith is really important to me, and I think building on that foundation, going forward, I think having small children, having a relationship with God's always there. He doesn't change, he doesn't move, but you might feel like you don't have the same amount of time to sit and worship for hours or go to be able to focus in church because you're running after little kids.
Quiet times are not very quiet anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It does kind of change that, but I suppose when you have that depth of relationship and you know that God's always with you, you can carry that on into your day, whatever that looks like. And obviously, ideally, you would have extended periods of time, praying, but that doesn't always happen. So for me, the gift of tongues is a very helpful gift, which I try and use as often as possible when I'm driving in the car and just doing things at home, pottering around at home, cleaning up and that sort of thing.
What do you find a gift of tongues particularly does for you?
I think it's what I love about tongues is you don't know what you're saying, but you're thinking about God and you're just like, oh God, you're just leading my prayers right now. And I think, you can maybe consider different people or situations when you're doing it, but actually I feel like what you're praying is in alignment with what God wants you to pray about. And you're connecting your spirit with his spirit, and it's such a weird gift, isn't it? It's
weird.
A very weird gift, and it's hard to explain to people who don't have that or who haven't experienced that before. But I think the depth that you get from it, actually, how it builds you up spiritually, is really cool. So that's something that I use a lot, and I kind of where I'm up to now in life. Things have changed quite a lot. So I was working for children's services, supporting families for 8 years. And during that time, I got so much training and I really grew my understanding of like child development, parenting, family, that sort of thing. So
that's so handy to have it as a parent.
Oh yeah, it is. And I mean, generally how I feel just about parenting anyway, is it's like a mirror.
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
It's like once you start to look into it, you see yourself reflected back.
Right.
And it's almost like you think, right, gosh, what, I didn't realise I still needed some healing in that area, or oh God, I didn't realise I need to work on that with you. And I mean, when you just think of the fruits of the Spirit, and that's how we're meant to be with our children, and it's not easy, is it? So
love, joy, peace,
gentleness, self-control. That's what I'm talking about. It's not always the easiest thing in life anyway, is it? And thank God we've got the Holy Spirit to help us with it. But I think also then as well, I was saying this to you earlier, I think we can get to this point where we're aiming for perfect, and actually perfection can become a bit of an idol. And I think it can be like that in all walks of Christian life, not just parenting. And God knows that we're not perfect, and he wants to meet us where we're at with that. And it's about having some kind of compassion for ourselves and not berating ourselves too much as parents. We're never going to be perfect. So that's quite a big thing for me. Always, understanding where I need to grow, but holding that intention with not putting myself under too much pressure, not berating myself, but remembering what's God's voice in this situation.
Totally.
He's full of compassion. He's slow to anger, and having that perspective about myself as a parent.
And also, I'm
important.
a daughter. Like you're a daughter or you're a son as a parent. It's easy to put yourself in the parent's shoes all the time, but actually, you're a son of God. You're a daughter of the King. So, like, putting yourself in that childlike sort of state as well, like being both the parent and a child. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and God's ways for us. My yoke is easy, my burden is light, and sometimes it doesn't feel like that, does it? But I think that's when we're taking on the weight of the world, and actually what God says is, give that to me, walk with me, like I'm going to help you in this, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to walk you through this. Whatever that's like for you, whether that's easy or hard. But for me, parenting has been a challenge, and knowing the things that I know through my job, or through my old job, and then now my current job, which I suppose we'll get on to, that it does make you think, oh gosh, like I need to think about this, I need to think about that, but also it's bearing in mind, we're not perfect, and we're not going to be, and we just need to give ourselves some compassion with that.
I do really like what you're saying about parenting being like a mirror, but I also think that a lot of our relationships are like a mirror.
Definitely.
Whether it's in a marriage or in a best friend relationship, friendship, colleagues at work, the things that frustrate us about others, whether it be our little tiny people, our parents, our family, our colleagues, things that frustrate us about other people are often the things that actually irritate us about ourselves. That actually like grate on us because we wish we weren't like that. And I think often, it's the take the log out of your own eye before you try and take the speck out of somebody else's. That's why what Jesus said there is so profound, because that's all of our lives. In every single relationship, it's so easy to see what's going on in someone else's life, or that bit of somebody else that just frustrates you or annoys you, but what it does in you is actually more problematic. The reaction that you're giving, or the resentment or the bitterness, the frustration, whatever, God's going, hang on, have a little look at yourself here, check out that massive log that's in your eye. Like, these are some of the things that you've got to work on as well. I think that's true of all of our relationships, but totally relate on the parenting front. Like, my little people are the best in the world, but also they bring out the worst in me sometimes. And I see that mirror all the time. Like, okay, come on, Rach. Like, you've got this to work through with the Lord, because there's all this stuff that you're seeing about yourself that's still God's got to do some work in you. Yeah, totally. So as you've kind of journeyed that, and you're saying you don't work for child services anymore, so tell me a bit about where you're at, what you're doing now.
So kind of coming from my own experience of struggling with different aspects of parenting, and obviously learning what I learned at work and thinking, how come everyone doesn't get a chance to know some of this stuff? I mean, when you think about we are created beings, and how God's designed us and how he's actually designed babies' brains is that they grow in the context of relationship, which is amazing. So
it just screams God, doesn't it?
It totally does. So it's like he designed a baby's brain so that, you know, for the parts of the brain which are then going to impact on their social, so their relationships, their emotional side, that all grows within relationship. And we need to know about this, because actually it then dictates how we then relate to our child. So basically, like, loving your child. Some things that might come naturally to some people and might not to others. Smiling at your child, hugging your child, kissing your child. All of these things actually contributes to child development, which is just amazing. That's how God's created it to be. And he's such a God of relationship. You know, obviously he himself is in relationship, you know, the Trinity. The Trinity, that's relationship. And then obviously he wants to have a relationship with us. The Bible's such a picture of God connecting with his children. And I think you see that repeated in us as humans, in this human relationship. So I just wanted to actually start to share some of that simple information with parents. And I thought it would help specifically parents who maybe haven't had a positive childhood experience themselves. Maybe they weren't loved or shown affection as a child, and they might want to do things differently with their own kids. And I was thinking about, why don't we just do like a video about it, and every parent gets to see it when they go to the health visitor appointment or midwife. So I actually did the academy with 313. With
Academy of Ministry and Leadership with Steve Mack.
With Steve Mack. Cool. I know you had him on the podcast as well. And doing that helped me to look into it. I was looking in a different project, but it actually started to open my mind to think, well, I've got this passion. I feel like God's given me this idea. Why don't I do something with it? Obviously, it hasn't been as simple as that. It's been a lot of work and applying for funding. I didn't really think through I need to be an organisation. So we are an organisation now. We're called Close Knit, as in close-knit families. But that also relates to Psalm 139, you know, he knit us together in our mother's womb. And actually when a baby's born, they're not born with a fully developed brain. So then the rest of that knitting gets handed over to us as parents. God started that pattern off, and we continue that.
I love that picture.
Yeah,
but
it's
that's
so
quite
cool,
a responsibility.
I know.
Gosh.
This is what I mean. The mirror, Rachel. The mirror. That's probably what you're going to call this podcast now, isn't it? The mirror. So I think I'm focusing on that at the moment. We're a social enterprise, so we're producing more resources than just that video. And I've got a small team around me, but we're still growing. I'm still learning a lot about the world of business. Plus really trying to grow my knowledge in this area around baby brain development, parent-child relationships, and trying to live it out at home as well, you know, which sometimes is easier than others and feels natural than others. It's easy to talk about it, isn't it? It's
easy to have these conversations and say, oh, this is whatever, and there's loads of parenting podcasts out there, loads of parenting resources, but when the rubber hits the road and you're at home with the child who's tantruming for the 15th time that morning, like, what does this look like, and how do I love, and how do I... So tell me about this baby brain thing, because at what point is a baby's brain then developed?
So most 90% of the growth is done when they're 5, but actually our brains don't stop developing until we're 25. And then even when we're 25, it's a lot more difficult, but the brain can change its structure as well. It's called neuroplasticity, and that's where things come into it. Like if you think about in the Bible, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It is possible, but it's a lot easier to do it when children are younger, especially under 5. That's when the main foundations of the brain are laid. But also in the teenage years, there is a big change in brain development as well. So that's a really key time if someone's had a really difficult start, if you're really putting in that environment. And I actually asked the trainer, who wasn't a Christian, about this. I said, if you've got a teenager who's had a terrible time when they're under 5, and you want to basically try and help rewire their brain so that they've got those foundations where they're expecting love and safety and trust, how do you do that? And she said they need to be in an environment of unconditional love. That's what, for someone who's not a Christian, That's what they're saying. And where is the environment of unconditional love? Well, it is with God. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So how much of a responsibility does that give to us to be telling our teenagers about Jesus as well?
And actually it's a massive responsibility, not just for individual families, but for our churches.
Yeah.
You know, as a network of churches taking ground, you know, we are the family of God. And so being these places of unconditional love, how do we do that? How do we express ourselves in a way that reflects that unconditional love of God to everybody, especially our children and our teenagers, especially those who, you know, do unlovable things, who do difficult to love things. How do we do that? How do we create that? And that's amazing.
So when you look into the science of it, it totally backs up scripture. It totally backs up. It's like it's catching up with how God actually intended things to be. And I think it does put the responsibility on us, but we're not alone in it. And that's another thing, isn't it? We've got the Holy Spirit, and I just pray, you know, that God helps me with that every day. You know, I think about parents who don't have the Holy Spirit, and I think, gosh, like, how are you managing? Because, you know, we've got that as well, which is great. And obviously getting the support networks around us, which we have within church as well. So just to encourage parents as well to link in with other parents and people who aren't parents in church, and kind of support each other, because it's a really important time to be sowing into a child's life is a really important time, and we need to support each other as much as we can, really.
Oh, amazing. So tell me about some of the really key things for you that you're talking about with families, you're talking about with close-knit, your organisation.
I think our strapline is connecting parents and children, and prioritising that connection and that relationship is so important. Growing up, that was something that my parents did really well. We had like one-to-one time with our parents, even though there were 7 of us, which is probably quite difficult for them. And we had a lot of fun. Like I mentioned, that we didn't have a TV. But I remember one day that my friend came over for tea, and I was in primary school. And it was when that song Cotton Eye Joe came out. Remember that song? And we're like dancing around the room to this song, and my dad like was taking it in turns to put people on his back. And my friend was like, "This is the best time ever." And she like went home to her parents and was like, "Can I go back to her house? We've been dancing to Cotton Eye Joe." I mean, such a simple thing, but that's like a kind of a core memory for me, really. And even maybe my friend, you know, and kind of thinking about her, thinking, oh, I wonder what her experience was like with her mum and dad, and maybe she didn't have those fun times. And keeping your relationship, kind of whatever's going on at whatever stage in parenting you're at, however old your child is so important. And that's what God has for us, and he has fun for us as well, and he wants us to have fun with our kids and have those times where you're building up those core memories and having those exciting, like, lovely moments together. So that's one thing that I would say is prioritise that one-to-one connection. I think something else as well is about being realistic about our expectations, and that's being realistic of what we expect of kids and being realistic of what we expect of us as parents as well. You know, one of the things I've learned is that children don't develop self-control, some children, until they're 7.
Wow.
So what is it that we're expecting children to do? And are we almost setting them up to fail, thinking, well, you should be able to do this? And we're putting ourselves under the pressure that we don't need to as well.
There was this like trend that went out, I don't know if you saw it all on social media, where parents would put sweets out in front of their kids and then walk away and video them and see if their kids ate the sweets. But that's fascinating, because I remember some parents having conversations and being like, oh, I'm not going to do it because I know my child will just eat the sweets and I don't want to embarrass them. And I don't want to be humiliated. Like some kids will just be really good and not eat the sweets, and some kids don't. But that's fascinating that actually their brains don't develop the ability to activate self-control until they're 7 potentially. Isn't that such a way off your shoulders when you know that information.
And this is what I mean. This is why I want to get more things out there for parents, because I think people are putting themselves under pressure. They're putting the children under pressure that they might not necessarily need to. And that's not to say that you shouldn't have boundaries and you shouldn't have things you're working towards. Obviously, you want to encourage your child to have self-control and you want to help them grow in that area. But I just think it's something to be mindful of, really. And I would advise parents to just do a little bit of research. What is developmentally expected of your child at the age? And kind of going back to teenagers, when they have that big shift in their brains and that big rewiring time, they go back to like kind of toddler-like behaviours. So it's not to necessarily expect them to behave like a toddler.
Or excuse it and make it all okay.
Yeah, but it's to understand and think, right, this is why this is happening. And I think sometimes when we have the understanding, it gives us the grace to deal with it as parents.
You're not just being disrespectful and horrible to me. Your brain is rewiring. I need to help facilitate that rather than punish it all the time. Wow, okay, interesting.
So that's definitely something else I'd say. Obviously, we've talked already about that kind of the perfection and putting yourself under that pressure. And I do think put yourself in your child's shoes. You know, sometimes we don't think about what's going on for them, what they're experiencing, what might be happening for them at that time. So we're just like, come on, you need to do this, and maybe not thinking about actually what's going on around them at that time.
I totally see that. The other day, one of my kids was playing with some Lego and I was trying to get them out the door. And I was like, right, we need to get shoes on. And he sort of said, he turned to me, he just said, can I just finish what I'm doing? And I was like, oh yeah, like you're in the middle of something. And if somebody came up to me while I'm in the middle of like something and was like, right, come on, crack on, we've got to go, I'd be like, hang on a second, I need to just finish what I'm doing. And I had this moment where I was like, what you're doing is important. To me, it's just Lego. It's not important. Put it to one side, you can finish it when you get back. But to him, he's a child, he's producing something here, and he needs to just put a couple more bricks on and then he'll be ready to go. Give him the space. But it's the expectation thing, and I do want to be able to finish what I'm doing before I'm expected to start the next thing.
And that's really good that he was able to say that to you, and that shows that you've created that kind of safety where he feels like he can speak up and say what he wants as well.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's really good. Looking after your own well-being is a huge thing, and I suppose it's going back to that you can't pour from an empty cup type analogy. And even if you think Jesus, you know, he still had his times of quiet before he went out and was with the disciples and was like preaching to people.
Spend time with the Father, praying.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to do, especially when you've got young children, but there are ways that you can prioritise looking after yourself. And I think that's kind of going back to what I was saying before about getting support from different church members and different church family. That's also helpful for you as a parent. And to know you can't do everything. I remember so Ina and Isaiah, well, I think Isaiah was about 6 months, Ina was about 2.5 months, and we'd
2.5 years.
Sorry, no. Oh, sorry, yeah. Ina was 2.5 years. Yeah, that's not possible.
That's not an age gap, yeah.
That's not possible. Yeah, Ina was about 2.5, so that I was still kind of trying to get possible to get them to both nap at the same time at that point. I mean, I knew it was, you know, it was a wild thought, but I was trying to do it. And I'd had a morning where I'd had my friend round and she'd brought her 2 kids who were similar age to mine, so obviously, you know, it was just carnage. And we'd had something to eat, and for some reason I thought it'd be a good idea to like make some chilli and jack and potatoes. Don't ask me why I thought that was a good idea. Again, unrealistic expectation probably. She left and I thought, do you know what? I'm going to take the kids out on a drive. I'm going to sit in the car. I'm going to get myself a drink. I'm just going to have a bit of time of quiet. I know the house is a mess, but it doesn't matter. You know, I'll just have to sort it later. I need a bit of rest. The kids hopefully are going to nap. At the time, our house was for sale. And the estate agent had the keys. You're not preempting where the story's going, Rachel, are you?
No, of course not.
So then I went on a drive, came back. I was just like having a little mindful moment, you know, on my driveway while the kids were asleep. And I thought, has that someone just come out of my door? I thought, no. And then I thought, I don't even know who they are. And then I was thinking, that's the estate agent. Anyway, the estate agent comes and like knocks on the window and he was like, oh, I'm very sorry, Mrs. Munby, but did you know there was a viewing today? And I was like, no, I did not know there was a viewing today. And basically, they hadn't told us. but they took 2 people around our house, and I cannot tell you about the things that they would have seen. It was awful. Talk about your life just being put on display.
Yeah.
I mean, luckily I never met eyes with those people, and they never met eyes with me. Safe to say they didn't put an offering in the house. It was just that point of an example of, I suppose, that you can't have it all, can
No,
you?
you
I've got 2
definitely
kids napping at the same time, but my house is a mess, and people actually saw it. So yeah, look after your own well-being.
Yeah, totally. That would have been a much better story if they had bought the house. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what it's going to look like in real life.
Yeah, no.
Great. Yeah, yeah.
Maybe
I
they were
can
just
see
like,
this.
oh, I can see that. Oh, honestly, I'm naturally a messy person, but I do love to have a tidy house.
Yeah.
So I have to work really hard to like keep it tidy, and the shame, I do have to work through a bit of shame.
Bit of shame.
That one. And I think lastly, the last thing that I would say is about just kind of going back to the first point, repairing that relationship when things go wrong.
Yeah, wow.
we do get it wrong at times. We'll lose our temper. We'll shout. We'll say something that we think, oh gosh, I can't believe I've just said that to you. And it's just modelling that, I've got that wrong. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, will you forgive me? And just using that in our relationships, that's really powerful. And that's really powerful for child development as well, because it shows the child, actually, I can make a mistake and I can make it right.
Yeah.
And that repair is almost as important, maybe more than if it didn't happen in the first place.
Wow.
And sometimes, we can maybe think, well, why should I apologise to my kids? I'm the ones that's in charge. But actually, it's teaching them about that, forgiveness and kindness, and that we're not perfect as well.
Yeah.
And that's such a big thing, really, that I think kids need to understand, because they can see, oh, I can make it right when I make a mistake, and I can have a second chance at doing something again.
Yeah. And I think as well, giving it, for me, my kids need a bit of time before they say sorry.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's really important. I think I have always felt like, oh, they need to say sorry straight away. They need to make it right straight away. But actually giving them some space to decide whether they're sorry and like really...
To feel it themselves. And reflect on it themselves.
Yeah, I found that to be really helpful for my kids. And my expectation of, no, you need to go say sorry and make friends right away and fix it, is not actually realistic for my children.
And you want it to be genuine as well. Like, we don't want to just teach our children to say sorry when they don't mean it. We want to actually them to understand about that and understand
about repairing relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's really amazing.
So prioritise your connection and your relationship with your child. Be realistic about your expectations about your kids and yourself. Put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
Look after your own well-being and repair when things go wrong.
I think that those are really helpful 5 things, and I think everybody listening to this podcast, whether you've got young children, teenage children, whether your children have left home or you've got no children, actually this is about relationship. And I think all of those 5 things actually relate to every area, every relationship that you might have.
Totally. I was thinking that this morning when I was reading back over them. I thought, this isn't just about kids, actually. If we put ourselves in other people's shoes when we maybe got a conflict with them, actually we can see things from their perspective and we can understand maybe why they made the decisions they made. It doesn't make it right necessarily, but just having that compassion, that understanding, it helps us create that like environment of unconditional love we were talking about.
And these are absolutely ways to show that unconditional love of God to your kids. And it's easy to think that going to church on a Sunday and them doing the kids' work or them doing something once a week with a Christian toddler group is going to be enough to show them the ways of God. But actually it's not. It's in the everyday, what is God revealing to me as a parent, and how can I show that to my kids? And sometimes it's not always conscious, but it needs to be part of who we are as parents, about our lifestyle and the way that we parent and the way that we do family being an expression of the love of God to our kids, engaging them in that relationship, because the Holy Spirit is our primary discipler, but we're quite close second, especially when our kids are so little. It's massive, and God's given us that responsibility to disciple and show our children the way of God. And it's a massive responsibility. But like you've already said, we have the help of the Holy Spirit. We're not on our own. This isn't a list of do's and don'ts. This is about you plugging into God and then you revealing the love of God to your children in whatever way is right for your family.
Amen. Yeah.
Amazing. Beth, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
At the end of every podcast, I invite each of my guests to share a worship song that might be on their heart, that God's maybe speaking to you afresh with. Have you got one for us today?
Yeah, I've been listening. My friend recently introduced me to Carrie Job, It's Your Nature. I don't know if you've heard that one. And it's a lovely song. It's all about God restoring where you've had pain and sadness and darkness, and I just think it's just reminds you of who God is and what He's about and the restoration that He brings. It's a really gorgeous song to just listen to and reflect on what God's done in your life. I love it.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Beth.
You're welcome. Speak to you soon.
We hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you've got a story to tell, get in touch with us. We'd love to hear it. You can contact us at podcast@takingground.org.uk. See you next time.